You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is Monday. It is 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. Do you know where the crypto markets are? Let's find out together. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the ever-exciting Options Insider Radio Network. I'll be your host for this fun sojourn through the world of all things crypto derivatives. Reminding you at the top here, if you like what you hear, not just for this program, but for the entire network, make sure you leave a review on your platform of choice. New folks are continuing to discover our network and this program en masse these days. If you're into crypto derivatives, it's really kind of the only game in town. I'm not sure what else you're listening to. So if you like what you hear, keep those reviews coming so new folks can continue to discover this program, more important than ever in these troubled times. And it's also important to break out the old hot seat every now and then, because it's fun to dive into all the different aspects and what's going on in the world of crypto. So without further ado, let's do just that. Let's roll out the Crypto Hot Seat.
Forget about cold storage. It's time to turn up the heat on thought leaders from the world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time to take their place on the Crypto Hot Seat.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Crypto Hot Seat, the portion of the show we welcome on guests from throughout the world of crypto derivatives and indeed beyond, and proceed to pick their brains for the benefit of you, the listener. And next up in the old hot seat is a return offender, Mr. Greg Magadini, the co-founder over there at Genesis Volatility. Greg, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown, sir.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm really happy to be here.
Greg, you guys have been pretty busy over there in the land of all things Genesis Volatility. I do believe the last time you joined us was a little over 2 months ago, right in the beginning of August. A lot has kind of popped off in the world of crypto since then. I know you guys have been up to a lot as well. So maybe let's start there. What's the latest? What's the hot new thing? What do you guys have up your sleeves over there in the land of Genesis? This is the last time we chatted, Greg.
Yeah, so we've actually been doing a lot of developments. We've done a whole new suite of features, and we're actually launching kind of our upgraded version today. So today we'll have the freemium model. So the premium offering has new tools. So some of the tools are, you can check out specific options and see how retail versus market makers are positioned in that particular instrument. What's the range of volatilities that this instrument has traded? We also have some new tools in the realized vol space, so we could see sort of a heat map of where realized vol happens during the week and what hour of the day. For any sort of time period of interest, whether it's the past year or the past month or some particular month back in time. We also have some new features for historical data. So we have some what we call shadow skews and shadow term structures, which basically allows traders to compare where the curves are currently quoted right now to where they've been quoted in the past. So you can sort of go back to a day in the past and a certain hour of the day of interest, and you can see how that particular instrument, whether it's the term structure or the skew of a particular expiration, how that was quoted. And so you can kind of see how that moves over time as far as quotes go. And you can also see how it's traded over time using some of the historical data. So we've been making some new features. We're really excited to get these tools out there and have traders start using them to make markets.
I like it. You know, you're talking my language there with heat maps and shadow skews. A lot of fun stuff to dive in. Maybe let's start with the heat maps, because I know whenever you start parsing and analyzing the activity, some interesting nuggets can emerge out there. Now that you guys have these heat maps up and running, any surprises, any interesting developments you've noticed out there as you've started to map this data and this activity throughout the day there, Greg?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that we've seen is that if we're looking back to year-to-date data, like Thursday, midday UTC, so call that like 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. UTC was kind of where all the activity happened. But if you're looking at the past month, really Mondays and Thursdays are the days that pop off. So, you know, the weekends are quiet, which is no surprise there. And then everyone just kind of positions on Monday morning. So that's basically what we've seen today. So we had this rally going into the weekend, and then we just sort of consolidated all weekend. And then Monday morning happens, and then we get a breakout rally right away. So kind of having some sort of idea of when vol comes into the market is a great way to, trade derivatives if you're trading short-dated options or day trade the futures. If you're doing a breakout play and you know that, okay, if a breakout were to happen, today is the day that typically happens. And so you can have a little bit more confidence trading that setup.
And the same with the shadow skew. I like the name, first off, shadow skew. I think you can just go with that. It's a great marketing gimmick. And maybe I smell the hand of the greasy meatball involved in that one. But same thing, shadow skew, looking back at the evolutions over time. We're going to get to that all in a little bit when we get to the Bitcoin breakdown segment here. And we know Bitcoin and ETH skew are certainly fascinating ones to watch. Any interesting nuggets you pulled away, or maybe some surprises as you started mapping that and analyzing that over time there, Greg?
Yeah, so one thing that we've seen that was kind of interesting is that when we were looking at the term structure, at the beginning of October, we had a certain term structure. Volatility is pretty low in the Bitcoin space right now. And then we had kind of this big move, and vol didn't move at all. And actually, if you looked at Saturday versus the 1st of October, the vol dropped a little bit across the board. So right now, the vol environment is still a low environment, but it looks like the ranges are starting to expand. So I would expect some repricing in the implied vol space, and that has yet to come. So, we'll see what this week brings, but there's definitely some surprises there.
Certainly are a lot of things to parse in the implied versus realized vol space in all things Bitcoin. Interesting stuff. I was just logging into your platform ahead of the show here, Greg, to kick the tires and light the fires for myself. And I noticed your open beta, I think it comes to an end in about 26 days here. So how has that process been going, and how has the new user acquisition been going over there in Genesis? And what have you guys been seeing on that front? Who's actually kicking the tires over there? Who's using this? Is it retail folks? Is it institutions? Who's been knocking on the door over there at Genesis, sir?
Yeah, so we have a nice mix. So we definitely have some institutional folks, a lot of the people trading block trades over there on Paradigm and other venues like that. So there's kind of market makers and bigger players that we chat with. We chat directly with them in Telegram, and they use our platform. And then we have sort of like a Twitter base of retail users who are both experienced traders and new to the option and vol space traders. And so they've been using the platform as well. So we've been having a growing user base every day pretty much. And it's a nice mix of both kind of the professionals and of the new players in the vol space. So that's been great.
Yeah, new players. It's been a fascinating time for that across the option spectrum. We were just talking on our show earlier today, the option block, about just the explosion we've seen from Robinhood on the retail front, driving skews and things to outlandish levels in products like Apple. I think before even noon today, Apple had already crossed 2.5 million contracts. So Maybe we're on the cusp of that in the crypto space as well there, Greg. Maybe we just need whatever that Robinhood-esque catalyst is in the crypto space to really drive this explosion of, your proverbial grandmother from Iowa here who wants to just buy one lot of upside calls in Bitcoin and we'll be off to the races. What do you think there, Greg? Are we on the cusp of that in Bitcoin as well, or is it still a little bit far removed for your average Joe retail?
I actually do think we're getting closer and closer to it. So something that we've kind of looked at, me and my co-founder, we've looked at sort of the growth across all the option spaces. So like you mentioned, equity options have been growing a lot, and we're hitting records in the equity option space. We've also been growing in the future option space and as well as the non-equity option space. So kind of options across the board have been growing. And then if you look at crypto options, those have been growing a lot. So DEREBIT is the main player right now, and they've had, Q1 2019 to Q1 2020 was about a 400% increase in volume. And then quarter over quarter within 2020, the DEREBIT volumes have been growing. So we think it's a huge growing space. And it's something I'm really excited about. I think derivatives markets are great for efficient markets in general. So it allows people to assume the risk that they want to assume without necessarily needing to pony up everything that they would want to pony up. And it functions as a really good insurance market for people to protect assets and long-term wealth. So having an efficient derivatives market creates an efficient market, which creates cheap to transacted markets. And over time, that's kind of a net benefit to all users in markets. So it's a trend that I'm really excited about. I hope people manage their risk properly. That's the downside with derivatives. People still got to, understand what they're doing and not take too much risk without knowing it. But given that constraint, I do think it's a net benefit.
Are you implying all those grandmothers from Iowa loading up on Upside and Apple aren't doing it properly, Greg? Is that what you're saying?
As long as they know what they're doing, then that's fine.
I don't know. Of that 2.5 million contracts on the tape by noon today, I wonder how much of that was informed paper. But, interesting things are cooking. You just mentioned some of the new tools you guys have launched. This is the last time we chatted with you guys back in August. But you also have real people coming in and kicking the tires over there on the platform as well. So oftentimes when you have real people coming in and engaging with the platform, the use case evolves in some interesting ways that maybe you didn't anticipate going in when you first designed this. Now you got people actually over there banging away at the platform. What would you say is the most popular tool over there at Genesis these days? Greg, is it what we just talked about? Is it like the heat map or the shadow tools, or are they getting excited about something else over there?
Actually, most of our traffic goes to how things are priced right now. So most of the traffic goes to the current SKEWs and the current term structure and the current open interest and the volatility and SKEW progression over the past month. So I would expect the realized vol tools would be the most popular ones. Those are sort of my favorites. But it looks like our users really gravitate towards just looking at the curves, how they're priced right now.
Hard to argue with that. The SKEW curve does provide a lot of information. That was certainly before a lot of these options really got listed en masse back in the heady days of, let's say, the end of 2017 when Bitcoin was launching towards and marching towards 20,000 and the futures were just listed at CME and CBOE. That's when everyone was speculating wildly in our audience and throughout all of 2018. What would the Bitcoin SKEW look like if the options were listed? And we had wild and interesting discussions out there. Now we actually have the data to actually analyze. So it doesn't surprise me that the folks are sinking their teeth into that. But, now that we got the folks beating away at the platform, the open beta is up and running, things are hot and heavy over there in Genesis land. Looking down the road a little bit there, Greg, what would you say is the long-term plan, dare I say the end game, for Genesis? Do you think this continues to grow and evolve as a standalone analytics platform for a lot of these high-end, sophisticated users? Do you see yourselves maybe partnering with a brokerage firm or licensing or maybe being acquired down the road? Where do you think Genesis Vol fits into the landscape down the road there, sir?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have kind of a few visions. So the first one is our web app, which is sort of the retail platform. So this is what we have out there right now. So anyone who is new to these tools, they don't know how to build them themselves, this is what they would go to. Then we have our next iteration, which is going to be an API feed. So for the more sophisticated shops or hedge funds who want raw data to work with, they could plug into the API feed and use that as their raw data source. And then finally, we're really excited about incorporating DeFi options. So we're in the process of building tool sets to incorporate the various DeFi options out there that live on the Ethereum blockchain, and essentially allow a user to, say, log in with a MetaMask account, and then a MetaMask is sort of like the in-browser wallet that allows you to interact with smart contracts. And basically, the GVOL platform would be able to read all your DeFi option positions and spit out your Greeks. And so you can just, get a quick glimpse at, okay, this is the sort of Greek exposure that I have, and then eventually, hook up with some of these DeFi options to create a sort of an exchange, a relayer for order flow. So we think that space is going to be a growing space that's really interesting. And then on the listed space, we are continuing to partner with various brokers who are doing the execution. And so we really want to get our tools out there in front of everyone who's trading the listed option space as well.
All right, good stuff. We teased a lot of activity. We got to get to it, Greg, and break down all the things going on in Bitcoin and ETH options and vol, SKEW, and all that fun stuff. Before we do that really quickly, I can tell our listeners are already excited. If they want to kick the tires for themselves, maybe try out your platform, where should they go? What should they do, Greg?
Yep, it's going to be gvol.io. So gvol.io is going to be the website. And we're doing the upgrade today, so we'll have the updated features.
There you go, gvol.io. Looks like some of our listeners already taking you up on that there, Greg. We got the intriguingly handled Coffee Sucks in our live chat saying he's about to go set up an account right now here, Greg. So there you go. You already got one person kicking down the door here as we keep on rolling right on into the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we break down what the heck's going on in the world's leading digital asset out there. Of course, we're talking all things Bitcoin. Coming into showtime, a bit of a reversal of fortune out there. It had been trending lower recently, and then, of course, last show it was kind of just languishing, not a heck of a lot going on. This week, turning right back around to the upside. Coming into the end of our show last week, we were threatening 10,700, about 10,691 or so. And coming into today's show, quite a bit north of that, over 800 handles, about 11,555 coming into the start of the show here today. So quite a big reversal out there in all things Bitcoin land. Let's sink our teeth into all that juicy vol out there. Or maybe not quite as juicy as it once was. Let's start in Realize land. Remember, 30-day Realize, listeners, is looking back over the last 30 days and seeing exactly how much volatility has been exhibited out there in the marketplace. And if you do that, you'll see that actually not a heck of a lot over the past month. Again, Realize volatility is going to change depending on your frame of reference. You set it to 10-day or 20-day or 3-day, or whatever you like to look at versus 30-day. You're going to have a different number. But we like to look at 30 days going back, and a whole heck of a lot of nothing, really, over the past 30 days. In fact, that Realize volatility is unchanged at a anemic 35%. That's not a heck of a lot of realized volatility out there. Listen, let's look ahead a little bit with the implied vol now. Of course, the 30-day implied vol is looking forward 30 days and trying to give you the best guesstimate of what the market is pricing in for a future estimate of volatility. And that's down a little bit, shall we say, down to about 50%. From not much, though. It was 52% last show. So it's still not pricing in a heck of a lot of vol out there in the marketplace out there right now. So kind of interesting out there, Greg, to kick off our show. Realized vol, I think, to put it charitably, is anemic. And implied vol, not much juicier, but a little bit juicier. What's catching your eye out there looking at the realized and implied vol in Bitcoin right now, sir?
Yeah, so I do agree. The vol space has been pretty low right now, so it's had more exciting times for sure. I do think long term this could potentially be sort of a bargain vol buy. I think there's a lot of fundamental stuff going on in the Bitcoin space that can make vol interesting here. Another thing that we like to look at is kind of the Bitcoin vol versus the ETH vol. So the kind of the long dated stuff is very similarly priced, and the short-dated stuff is a lot more expensive on the side. So there's definitely some opportunity there, but I do think, long-term vol is pretty cheap. I mean, right now, Amazon vol, 30-day vol is about 52, and, Bitcoin vol is about 55. So those are pretty close. And, Bitcoin's gone from 0 to 20,000. Obviously, Amazon's moved a lot as well, but that's got a lot bigger market cap. It takes a lot more money to move Amazon, and stocks are more predictable. And, we have a longer history of how to value stocks than we do this kind of new digital asset class. So there's kind of some opportunity there if you kind of measure it in a relative sense.
Funny you mentioned Amazon, because the yardstick we were using for a while there was Apple, which is, of course, pretty much the world's largest company out there. And they were trading at a little bit north of 60 vol for a while out there, which just shows you what a rarefied and unprecedented year 2020 is, with such a massive monstrosity as Apple can trade north of a 60 vol, actually higher than Bitcoin was and is right now. I do believe Apple vol has come in a little bit, but you mentioned Amazon, a similar story. These are massive mega caps out there. Usually takes a lot to move a large mega cap like that up to a north of 50 vol and sustain it for quite some time. Yet we're seeing levels out there that are fairly similar in both Bitcoin and in some of these tech mega caps that you guys can't get enough of on Robinhood and all of these other platforms. So I'm with you there, Greg. I think there certainly are some opportunities to be mined out there. Let's move on out to the Skew, see what folks are mining out there in Bitcoin Skew. One of the nice things about Bitcoin is that, the Skew tends to evolve a little bit, which is kind of fun. We talk about a lot of different commodity Skews on our programs like This Week in Futures Options every Thursday with the folks from CME and from FTSE Russell out there. And we like to talk about things like gold and you name it, the ags, the metals, the equities, because there's Skew moving all over the place. And Bitcoin is also a fun one to add to that mix because it moves quite a bit. In fact, we saw some interesting evolutions just on the show this past week. It was a pretty positive Skew last show, north of 6%, actually close to 6%, about 5.7%. Coming into this show, it's down quite a bit. It's down to about a negative 2%. So showing a interesting evolution out there in the Skew. I know you guys like to break down the Skew over there as well, Greg, and you like to do it in an interesting way. You look at kind of the near term, so let's say front month, the first 30-odd days worth of options. Then you get beyond that a little bit farther out in the term structure and see how the Skews are looking out there. Anything catching your eye out there in the Skew right now, particularly as it compares, front month to longer term, Greg?
Yeah, so there's this kind of phenomenon in crypto where longer dated options have very we call it positive Skew bid to the call side, and the puts are pretty flat. Whereas short dated options will either be symmetrical or can have very negative Skew where the puts are a lot more bid. So the short dated options have a very volatile Skew. And basically, since we started looking at this data over a year ago, the long dated options kind of have this pattern that they always start with, where it's basically the calls are very bid to the puts consistently, and that Skew is a lot harder to move for the longer dated options.
I think that's just the hodlers out there, Greg. They just can't get enough, and they have to buy and hold, whereas near term you get a little bit more of the active traders. What do you think is to blame for that long-term call love, sir?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot. So there's kind of two reasons why we think this is the case. One reason is we have the 2017, 2018 phenomenon, where in 2017 we had this massive rally and volatility hit some crazy levels, like 200 realized vol on 30 days, stuff like that. And then the bear market in 2018 was a lot more controlled on the way down. So you kind of have this crash up. You kind of have this, what we call like a VIX realized vol profile, where it kind of crashes up and then it kind of floats down. So that's kind of part of the reason why we think the long-dated Skews have a bid to the calls. But then there's the other phenomenon, which is how do you hedge these options? So the way that people will hedge these options is they'll trade the perpetual swaps or the futures on these various exchanges. And the deal with these is that they're denominated in dollars. So being short the future has positive gamma to it. And so therefore you can actually sell down the put and still be, positive gamma, because if you're short the future, as the price goes down, your future gets more and more short. And as the price rallies, your future gets less and less short. So there's kind of that convexity to the futures position, which is the hedge to the auction. And so that will also influence the skew.
Good stuff there. You're right. There are so many different moving parts to analyze out here when you're looking at things like skew in a product like Bitcoin. It's not just as straightforward as some folks tend to believe, particularly when you start parsing it narrow dated versus longer dated, because you're right, that's when a lot of other interesting impacts tend to play out. Let's see what sort of impact we're seeing right now in overall open interest. Remember, we saw a pretty aggressive peak in OI back towards the end of September. We've said it before on the show. We'll say it again. Crypto options just love a quarterly. I'm not sure why that is. That's just the way they line up. All of the OI tends to line up in months like September, and we saw that again last month. We saw a pretty aggressive high, closing in, looks like about $2.25 billion aggregated across most of the major platforms there towards the end of September. The OI came off pretty aggressively once September rolled off the board, but slowly but surely we're seeing October and other months start to grow, and we're starting to see DEES coming on strong as well, and overall OI starting to catch back up. Not quite near where we were at the end of September again, but closing in on the 2 billion level. It's like about 1.8 or so billion notional outstanding, again, aggregated across most of the major platforms. Let's see how those major platforms shake out. DEREBIT, obviously, still the big dog there at around 74% for a clear number one. CME holding firm, actually grown a little bit at number two. A little bit of paper going up there this week. We'll get to that in a little bit, at about 15% for number two. Then we got a bit of a tie here for number three, Bit.com and OKEX, both hovering around 4% of OI. LedgerX coming in behind them with 3%, and over there at BAKKT land, still a whopping 0%. No options flow going up out there pretty much at all. In terms of the big dog, DEREBIT, pretty active week out there. Nothing blowing the doors off, but a pretty decent day. In fact, today is the most active day so far. Coming into Showtime, we had about 177 million on the tape. That's not as high as we saw in recent weeks. In fact, last show that the big day was, September 24th actually was a big day with about 262 million. So we're not quite that high, but closing in on it today. So we'll see. Maybe if these trends continue, maybe today's numbers will light it up out there. Overall, from a volume perspective, Greg, anything interesting catching your eye, whether it be at DEREBIT or any of the other leading platforms out there this past week, sir?
Yeah, actually, something that we think is pretty interesting that happened over at CME in the past month. So basically, if you look at the volumes for CME futures and CME Bitcoin options, so basically September had 4.8 thousand Bitcoin future options that traded, or call it like 25,000 Bitcoin options if you adjust for the multiplier. And in August, they only had 13.5 adjusted for the multiplier. But what was interesting is that the volume in August for the futures was a lot higher. So the futures volume went down in September, but the Bitcoin futures options volume went up like 77%. And if you check out DEREBIT, the volume differential between August and September was about 2%. So you had this huge jump in Bitcoin options activity on CME that you didn't see on the other venues. So that was something that was really interesting. It kind of gives me the impression that some of these institutional players who basically can only play on CME are kind of decided to participate in September for the first time. So that was pretty interesting. We find that pretty cool.
Yeah, that has been a fascinating trend to watch, and you're right. It does seem like some of the larger institutional players, for a lot of reasons, the size of the contract, the fact that it's a listed exchange that they've heard of and that they know where it is, they can go see it. And it's regulated here in the U.S. That helps a lot of the listed large players here in the U.S. gravitate towards crypto. I've said it before, we do need one of these lit venues in the U.S. to really succeed, to get crypto options to the next level. We love DEREBIT. They do a lot of paper out there, but there's still a lot of players here in the U.S. that can't play there. So the success of whether it's a BAKKT or a CME, one of these big dogs has to succeed, and then I think that will definitely help lift all boats out here. Speaking of the volume, let's get to it a little bit out here. Saw some interesting prints back on the 9th out there in DEREBIT. It seems like the upside kind of call strip in November was the order of the day. Saw some 200 lot prints, which is decent size for DEREBIT out there. Going up on the 9th, it was the NOV 12,000, 13,000, it looks like 11,500 as well, and the 16,000 calls, going up almost all 200 or pretty close to 200 contracts all around the same time on the 9th, back when Bitcoin was 11,065 to about 75 in that range out there. So maybe a bit of a weird, funky upside call strip. Interesting stuff afoot out there in DEREBIT land. Today, actually, the big print, again, a pretty active day. I just checked, it's about 182 million worth of notional on the tape out there at DEREBIT land today. So a pretty active day on DEREBIT. Seems like the AUK 9,000 puts are leading the dance today on DEREBIT for whatever reason, with almost 2,500 on the tape coming into showtime. So a lot of action out there. Maybe someone drawing a line in the sand at the 9,000 strike, or maybe someone a little bit concerned about a pullback out there. Either way, 9,000 puts leading the dance out there in DEREBIT land. Let's look really quickly at where this OI is aggregating. Remember, crypto likes a quarterly, and back in June, that was a big month. 114,000 contracts open combined across all the major venues, DEREBIT, CME, LedgerX, all these different platforms. August, a lot less, about 62,000. Again, not a quarterly. September came on pretty strong, had about 87,000 contracts. Now, coming into today's show, we're seeing an interesting dance. DISA coming on strong here with about 38,000 contracts on the tape. And October actually in the front right now with about 42,000 contracts. That puts it up, about 5,000 contracts. So it looks like the lion's share of the gains in volume since last week, and indeed in OI, were out there in December, which, again, not surprising. Crypto likes a quarterly. But October holding firm out there. It'll be interesting to see how this race holds up out here between October and December. No, not a lot of love. About 23,000 contracts open out there. And March starting to come on the board as well with about 26,000 contracts. So actually more contracts open right now in March than there are in November, which again speaks to the fact that crypto options traders can't get enough of the quarterlies. If you're wondering which strikes are drawing their attention these days, last show, remember we were talking about downside strikes, 9,000 and 10,000 kind of being in the front of the race. This week, 12,000, which was our leading strike until September came off the board. Now kind of back in the lead. Pretty close race out there. About 13,000 contracts open over there on the 12,000 strike, followed by the 11,000 strike, a pretty close number 2 with about 12,800. So 11,000, not surprising, effectively an in-the-money strike on the call side right now. And 12,000, not that far away from these levels out there. So not exactly surprising that we've seen a shift up the strike chain there from the 9,000s and 10,000s of last week. Even though I say that, the 9,000 and 10,000 strikes are still pretty active, both at exactly 11,700 contracts outstanding, which is pretty interesting that they're both such pretty much even OI on those strikes. And you go all the way out to about 16,000, also pretty active out there as well, with about 10,000 contracts open. So pretty interesting spectrum of strikes drawing a lot of attention out there these days. Greg, you touched on the CME options, and they actually had a little flurry of paper over the course of the past week. The big day was on the 7th, and they did about 48 million worth of notional. But you know me, I don't like notional. Listen, I like to get into contracts whenever possible. They did a little over 500 contracts, about 530 contracts on the 7th, which again, it's a 5X contract, so it seems that's pretty beefy. That's a pretty beefy trade. Looks like the big print out there on the 7th was, again, it's these kind of verticals, these multi-leg verticals, maybe strips going up out here. It seems like the big trade on CME this past week was a 1,400, 1,600 vertical going up 105 times. And then also an 18,000, 2,000 vertical going up around the same time for 95 times. Seemed like it was all put up together, a total of exactly 400 contracts out here. Looks like it might have been closing as well. So maybe someone taking off a nice juicy strip to the upside here in CME. Greg, did this one come across your radar as well? And A, what are your thoughts on this CME print? And then B, if you have any thoughts on how the strikes are lining up and the months are lining up from OI across all the platforms, have at it as well, sir.
Sure. So we're still not incorporating CME data into our platform. That's something that we're in the process of talking to CME about. But we do have a new tool called this block trades tied up tool. So it allows you to see all the multi-legged block trades, how they go together. And as you alluded to, we saw a lot of stuff in November. We saw this is on DEREBIT. We saw some 13,000, 16,000 call spreads go up 500 times. Some 12,000, 16,000 call spreads go up 500 times as well. And then we saw kind of an interesting calendar. We saw NOVE 13,000 trading against DEES 18,000. That went up 100 times for about $130 each. So that's pretty interesting. Another tool that we think is really useful that we're putting out on the platform, basically what it does, it takes an expiration, so call December the kind of the most active expiration cycle in terms of OI. And what it does is it aggregates all the net aggressors across the board. So for example, if we're looking at out of the money calls, what is the position of net aggressors? And the reason why that's important is because we sort of assume, and call it 90% accurate, that net aggressors are retail. So they're the ones paying the spread to the market maker. And so we can see in DEES, net aggressors are short about 1,200 contracts of out of the money puts. They're short about 900 contracts of at the money puts. They're long about 2,000 contracts of at the money calls in DEES, but then they're short about 6,000 contracts of at the money calls in DEES. Excuse me, out of the money calls in DEES. And so the reason why that's interesting is you can sort of see how retail is positioned, and you can sort of back out what's the pain point for retail. And if you want to put on your own option position, you can understand, okay, I know that retail is net short all these out of the money calls, and I want to be long vol, so I'm going to pick out to be long whatever retail is net short, because they're the most likely to sort of scramble out if the market goes against them, pushing vol back up. So that's kind of a cool tool that we've been looking at. And we do think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the fundamental space for Bitcoin. So, there's a lot of chatter about central bank digital currencies, the Fed talking about, direct deposit to citizens for some sort of MMT. You have the ECB trademarking the digital euro. You have the BOJ saying that they're going to start experimenting with a central bank digital yen in April of 2021. And then on the private sector side, you have MicroStrategy buying, $250 million worth of Bitcoin. You have Square buying $50 million worth of Bitcoin. And so if anyone's thinking about being short vol, something to consider, close that unlimited risk, because, it only takes $2 billion to buy 1% of all of Bitcoin. And just to put that into context, the coronavirus CARES stimulus package was $2.2 trillion. So 10 times the market cap of all of Bitcoin. Just to put that in perspective. So you have, the government spending 10 times the Bitcoin market cap, and you have central banks now discussing, digital currencies. If we have central bank digital currencies, that really, in my opinion, makes the case for Bitcoin being digital gold very interesting. And so who's to say there's no central bank that decides to buy Bitcoin as a reserve currency? I mean, who knows? Maybe that's far-fetched, but it's also 2020, so, it could happen.
Yeah, it's the year of pandemics and civil unrest and double hurricanes and everything else out there, so you can't put anything past the year that is 2020. And now it's time for us to get on past all things Bitcoin. Not a lot lighting up in the future side of CME, as Greg kind of alluded to. A light volume week, about 6,000 contracts on the tape over there in CME every other day this week. Pretty much below that, not a lot going on out there in backed futures as well. So without further ado, let's get on to where I know Greg and his team really like to hang their hats. It's time to get out into the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, welcome to the altcoin universe portion of the show where we break down everything else outside of the world of the big dog, which is Bitcoin, except for here at the top where we break down the top 10. Remember, standard caveat applies. Take these market caps with an overall grain of salt. A lot of fluffery and skullduggery going into these numbers, but the rankings, I do think, have a little bit more merit. Number 10, Litecoin, coming in at about $3.3 billion. Number 9, Cardano, at about $3.4 billion. Number 8, Polkadot. Love the names out there. $3.7 billion. Then we cross $4 billion. That gets us to Chainlink. Number 7. Number 6, Binance Coin, almost $4.5 billion. Number 5, Bitcoin Cash, a little bit north of that, about $4.5 billion as well, just slightly north of Binance Coin. Number 4, our old friend, usually the perennial number 3, are now down to number 4. This is XRP at about $11.6 billion. That means number 3 is still Tether at roughly $15.7 billion. Numero dos ETH over there at about 43, almost $44 billion. And number 1 with a bullet north of 200B again Yep, it's the big dog, Bitcoin out there, 213, almost 214 billion out there. Some interesting stuff afoot out there in the top 10 yet again this week. Let's get out there to our number 2 in terms of market cap, also in terms of options volume. That is ETH. Another good week for the bulls out there. You know, we see this a lot. The rising tide in Bitcoin tends to lift all boats, and we're seeing that out there in ETH land. At the end of the show last week, we were at about almost exactly 350 in ETH, and coming into the show today, we're at almost a 388, putting it up almost 38 handles from where it was this time last week. So a good run here for the bulls in ETH land. Let's break down some of the OI and the vol out there. Vol in ETH has been an interesting beast. Let's go back again. Let's start in the rearview mirror. 30-day realized down quite a bit. Remember, as that frame of reference moves, that vol is going to change. And it's down from about 88% on the show last week. It was 112% 2 weeks ago. So a lot of vol a couple of weeks back. Now it's down quite a bit, down to a little bit shy of 70%, about 69%. So a lot of vol coming in out there in ETH land. The 30-day implied, different story, pretty much unched. It was, I think, 62% last week. It's 61% this week. So looking forward, that implied vol is pretty much unchanged, whereas the realized has come in quite a bit. Greg, I know you and your team like to hang your hat on all things ETH options out there. A lot's been catching your eye. I know you guys have been tweeting pretty actively about the OI changes and like the 200 and 400 strike in ETH. So what's been catching your eye out there in ETH options land and the volatility of late, sir?
Yeah, so definitely think ETH is an interesting product. So as far as kind of big trades, we saw some paper go up, basically 440 to 720 March call verticals go up about 3,000 times for $28. Overall, the vol levels, especially kind of in the March and D's, if you normalize them to Bitcoin, they're pretty cheap. So for example, Bitcoin's trading at 8 points cheaper in March than ETH is, but we have this looming ETH 2.0 that's supposed to potentially launch this year, which could be a real market moving event. So this morning we had a new test net for ETH 2.0 just launched. It launched pretty well. The last one had an issue because of a lack of participation, but now this one's doing pretty good. So people are feeling pretty confident that ETH 2.0 is potentially going to launch before the end of the year. So we've seen a lot of OI in December as traders position for a 2.0 event or non-event in the December space, before the end of the year. And the reason why we think that could be a market-moving event is that once ETH 2.0 launches, that's basically the beacon chain. It's going to be phase 0 of ETH. There's a multiple 2.0 phases, but this is the first one that allows ETH to be proof of stake. So basically, the 2.0 chains can be proof of stake, and people staking on the 2.0 chain will earn between 4 and 10% yield on their ETH. So we think that once ETH becomes a yielding asset, that could be a catalyst for ETH accumulation. So that's pretty interesting. We think there's definitely some opportunity out there.
Yeah, that could attract a lot of people because you're right. That yield aspect is attractive to a lot of people. Retirees, financial advisors, people who just like a nice high dividend yield on their stocks. That opens the door to a number of people having a crypto effectively becoming a yield asset. And of course, you can come in with the options and ramp up that dividend or create your own dividend income stream on top of it. A lot of cool things you could do with the options, but if the underlying itself is becoming a yielding asset, that changes the game a little bit. Maybe perhaps why we're seeing such interesting positioning out there in terms of OI and strikes in ETH land. In terms of volume, it was a decent week out there on DEREBIT, again, the leading platform for ETH. I wouldn't say it's a rock'em sock'em Roblox week. It looks like the highest volume day was back on the 9th with about 27 million worth of notional. That's a little bit below what we've seen recently, like back the previous show, the high was about 32 million on the 2nd of October. Going back to the end of September, about the 21st of September was about 45 million. So not quite at those levels, but decent paper nonetheless. Same deal here from an OI perspective. Similar to Bitcoin, we saw a huge mountain of OI going into the end of that quarterly with the September expiration. A lot of that went off the board with September, and slowly but surely ETH is starting to climb its way back. Looks like the OI peaked at right around $500 million towards the end of September. And coming into today's show, looks like OI out there in ETH land just crossed about 400 million, again, aggregated across all of the major platforms, which in this case is pretty much Derebit, and then a little bit at OKEX. And let's throw Huobi on there as well. They got about 500,000 worth of OI, but it's mostly OKEX, and 90% of it really out there on Derebit, but slowly coming back to about 400 million and change. So maybe not that far removed from surpassing September levels again. Is that your takeaway as well there, Greg, that, you know, the OI, as it is wont to do in crypto, kind of fell off a cliff after September and is slowly starting to build, maybe, as you mentioned, ahead of this new ETH 2.0 launch, sir?
Yeah, so the DEES contract has just been very dominant pretty much since March of 2020. We've had, like you said, the quarterlies get a lot of interest. But then as we had this kind of lower vol environment this past month, it's been kind of hard to have ETH build up OI again after kind of a quarterly expiration. So after the June expiration, for example, we saw a huge OI build up in July and August. And then now that we had the September quarterly expiration happen, without sort of vol coming back into the market, the OI has been pretty subdued as far as climbing back. But throughout the year, DEES has been the dominant OI contract for ETH, whereas for Bitcoin, it's been a lot more evenly divided.
Let's hit on a couple more of the altcoin you guys like before we get on into a bunch of your questions. You guys have a lot of them. Ripple, of course, good old XRP, now out of the top 3 at number 4. Up again this week, not quite a cent, so kind of a slight up week here in XRP, but still perhaps not the upswing some folks would like to see out there. Certainly the XRP bulls out there. Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV both, again, following the rising tide mantra out there. Bitcoin Cash up about 22, almost exactly from our last show, and Bitcoin SV up about 10, almost 10 and a half handles from last show. But now it's time for you guys to take the reins. It is time indeed to answer your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Crypto Questions. You guys know how to get at us here. A lot of different ways. You guys like to hit us up at Options on most of the major social media platforms is where you can find us, of course, via our mobile app, via our website, questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Also works, smoke signals, carrier pigeons, they all find our ways to our studio. If you want to get bumped to the top of the list, you can join us live in our live chat there every Monday, 2 p.m. Central is usually when this show pops off, just like a bunch of you did, including, I just like this handle, Coffee Sucks. He's the one, Greg, who says he's going to go set up an account for your system, so I think you have to be nice to him for the rest of the show. He commented that fundamentals are off the chain right now for Bitcoin. He also commented when we were talking about, I do believe, about the OI changes in Bitcoin options, particularly some of that upside positioning. He wanted to know if we thought it was because of MicroStrategy and Square now maybe. And of course, again, Square obviously driving a lot of flow these days out there in all things Bitcoin. He also commented he thinks Bitcoin is gold at the speed of internet. Bitcoin allows for instant exposure to any currency in the world at any and all times. Well, I agree with you on that. I'm not sure about Square directly if that's to blame or perhaps to target for the interest in, let's say, that 12,000 strike perhaps in particular out there. It does seem like there's a lot of upside furor out there. Greg, what are your thoughts here on Coffee Sucks? Maybe thinking it's because of Square for the upside. And also remember, he's just signed up for your platform, so you have to be nice to him.
Well, I got to say, I definitely agree with Coffee Sucks as far as his crypto analysis. As an avid coffee drinker on my 5th cup of coffee today, though, I have to disagree with the handle. I'm a big coffee fan. But in all seriousness, I do think Square, MicroStrategy, I think those kind of private sector players allocating some balance sheet to Bitcoin is just the tip of the iceberg. And again, it only takes $2 billion to buy 1% of the Bitcoin market cap. I mean, that's like peanuts. So you have kind of the private sector who's allocating balance sheet to Bitcoin, and in my opinion, a matter of time before kind of the central banking side of the world decides to allocate some balance sheet to Bitcoin, and all of a sudden you're at, $1 trillion market cap. That to me seems completely possible.
I'm looking here at the numbers for MicroStrategy. It looks like they put up most of their trades back in mid-August, almost exactly 2 months ago, around August 11th. They put in about $250 million and picked up about 24,500 Bitcoin out there. It looks like they did it in the spot, maybe some of them in the future. I don't know where all this went up out there. I haven't seen a lot of that positioning since then, so I'm not sure if that would really translate into this recent resurgence of interest we've seen out there in these, let's say, the 12,000 strike on the options. But it's certainly, the big players do like to play out there in CME. So maybe someone could be following this whale's lead and diving out to open a little bit out there in CME. We did see, again, that kind of funky four-way vertical there in CME, but it looked like that was mostly closing last week. So I'm not really sure what was up. Most of the paper we have seen in CME that's been sizable have been verticals like that. So kind of very interesting positioning out there. Not a lot of just straight up flyers out there, even though we have seen a few of those as well. It's mostly on the vertical front. But yeah, it's a lot of speculation as to who the big dogs are who are driving this flow, particularly at places like CME. Your guess is as good as any out there. Coffee sucks. I'm with you there, Greg. I'm not a huge coffee guy, but I do like it. I had a cup this morning, so not with the handle there either. But it is memorable. I'll give you that. All right, next up. Nikkei? Let's go with Nike. I think he just wants to go with Nike. Maybe he just likes Nike shoes. Nike wants to know. I keep hearing the term DeFi floating around out there. What the heck is all that about? Greg, I know this is kind of right up your wheelhouse. You guys are big fans of all things DeFi out there. So what do you have to share here with the creatively named Nike? What the heck is all that about, Greg?
Yeah, actually great developments. We just had on Saturday, Hedgic, which is a pooled DeFi option platform, launch their new upgraded version. So that's really exciting. There's about like $5 million locked up in there. But long story short, DeFi is basically on-chain finance. So there's a bunch of different tools. There's like money markets, lending and borrowing markets that live on-chain. There's futures that are where the collaterals pass between the counterparties that lives on-chain. And now we have options that live on-chain. So there's kind of two models. There's kind of the order book style that we're all used to for centrally traded options or exchange-traded options. And then there's the DeFi native pool model. And basically what that is that a bunch of people will allocate Bitcoin and Ether into a smart contract, called it the pool. And then market takers can decide to buy options against the pool. And then basically the collateral in the pool is what makes good on the option. So so far, everything in the DeFi option space is fully collateralized American-style options that are physically settled. But they're all smart contract-based. They all live on-chain. There's no clearinghouse. And then the only thing that makes sure that the counterparties are paid is the smart contract code. So this is kind of a new nascent, use case for smart contract blockchains. And in this case, Ethereum is kind of the OG of smart contract blockchains. And this is where the development's happening for DeFi. And this is a recent phenomenon that's really been taking on the past, call it 12 to 18 months.
I like that. The OG of smart contracts. It certainly is. It isn't that old, but in the accelerated timeline of all things crypto, ETH is getting a little long in the tooth now. Maybe that's why we're looking at 2.0 coming down the road out there. All right, next up, we got a lot of you guys chiming in with questions here. Let's see how many more we can fit on you in the remaining moments of the show. Tassilv wants to know, is there a certain degree of bid or slope you look for in Bitcoin options to indicate that a big up move, is in the works? We were just parsing Bitcoin SKEW a little earlier in the show. We have said before it's a fascinating one to watch because it does tend to help lead the dance a little bit and give you an indication of what kind of positioning we're seeing out there. You can hear a lot of different analysis tools and people talking about, what analysts think about different things. But at the end of the day, real tradable dollars are at work in the option SKEW, and that's why we like to look at tools like that. Greg, we were just talking about this earlier in the show. You guys over there at Genesis tend to parse the SKEW in two different ways. The near-dated SKEW, so it's kind of like the front month, which I guess you can kind of call it maybe the near-term trading noise, and then you go a little bit farther out, and that's predominantly bullish to the call side. So interesting stuff there. As Tassilv says, is there, I mean, obviously the calls are always going to be bid, but is there a certain degree, a certain slope to that call skew where you look at that and you say, okay, here we go. Now the game is afoot. We're moving on upside. Is there a level where you like to key in around?
Yeah, well, actually, so it's super interesting. So let's say you start with skews that have, 30 to 60 days until expiration. So call it 45 days. And you basically look how the skew changes over time. Well, the volatility of the skew itself is huge. So we've seen, back in August during the ETH rally, we saw call skew, the 25 delta call skew, being 10 points more expensive on the call side. And then a month later in September, it's almost 10 points cheaper to the call side. So you have this huge variation in skew itself. So the way that we look at it is less as a predictive tool and more as a positioning instrument. So when the skew is really, really bid, the way that we view it is that, retail is sort of FOMOing into getting long a bunch of calls. And so this, in my opinion, the way that I like to play that opportunity is that I'll sell those calls to retail, buy the puts, and then get long the future. And then basically have a position like that captures the edge that's being provided in sort of a one-way market to the call side. That's kind of making the skew go out of whack. And because there's so much back and forth on the skew itself, when the volatility calms down, that skew will get cheap again and can even go negative, and you can take that position off for a profit.
I do like how you guys put it there, the aggressors, the retail aggressors. I like your terminology. Shadow skew, aggressors. You certainly have some good marketing going on over there in the land of Genesis there, Greg.
Thanks.
All right, let's see. We got time for a couple more here. Elliot wants to know, are ETH options anywhere close to catching up to Bitcoin from a volume or liquidity perspective? Well, not. That's a hard way to put this. Let's see. Not really yet, but they're getting there. They're getting a little bit better. Let's say come into today's show, we were talking about OI at the top of the show. So let's just look at notional OI out there. Bitcoin options maxed out recently at a little bit north of 2 billion. Again, this is notional OI, and this is total across all of the venues. Right around, let's say about 2.25 billion out there. That was back towards the end of September. So pretty active time out there. And again, haven't really seen those levels come back. Similarly, around that same period for ETH options, if you add together, your DEREBITs and your OKEXs and a handful of others that put up any size paper in ETH, you got about 500 million, almost exactly, out there. So a little bit less than a quarter out there. So that gives you some frame of reference for how active ETH is in relation to Bitcoin. It's certainly far and away more active than just about any other crypto option you could find out there, except for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's still the big dog. It brings all the boys to the yard, however you want to term it out there. Bitcoin is still doing most of the paper. But ETH is catching up, so is it anywhere close? I will say yes, it is. It's in the rearview mirror, but you could see it. Greg, how would you put the relative levels of, as they put it here, volume and liquidity for ETH options versus Bitcoin, sir?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Mark. It's in the rearview mirror, but it's not completely close to it yet. I think the thing that's important to look for is the venues that host ETH. So, if there's a CME ETH future that comes out, then it's a whole different ballgame. We have, Grayscale that started with the Bitcoin investment trust, and now they have an Ethereum investment trust. So as kind of these products come online, as OKX and Hobai do ETH options, as kind of other crypto-centric options exchanges incorporate ETH, then for sure the volumes will sort of catch up. But then we also got to keep in mind that ETH has 1/5 of the market cap of Bitcoin, and that has about half the life of Bitcoin since inception. So Bitcoin definitely has that first mover advantage and all the network effects that come with that. And Ethereum is, in a way far behind. But I do think that as venues incorporate ETH, that'll catch up. And then the one thing, again, back to DeFi, as DeFi develops, ETH hedging vehicles are going to be more and more in demand. So.
That's a good point about the lifespan of the two products out there, because you're right, ETH hasn't been around as long. So from that frame of reference, ETH may be a little bit closer in the rearview mirror than you may think. Unfortunately, listeners, That music means we've come to the end. What an epic journey this has been through all things crypto. You guys have really made it great with your questions and your comments. Since he's so excited out there, I'll be nice. I'll give one more to Mr. Coffee Sucks, which he says his handle is ironic, by the way. He actually likes coffee. He wants to know, Greg, really quickly, he wants to know if you got any tokens from the Uni airdrop, sir. So if so, did you?
Yes, I think I got 3,000 tokens from the Uni airdrop.
Oh, well, there you go. 3,000 is your answer out here as we come to the end. Unfortunately, that theme music means that's the close of our journey. But before we go, we kind of touched on it at the top of the show, where you can go to kick the tires and light the fires, just like a lot of our listeners have done, sounds like, already here on the show. But, Greg, if they need another reminder of where they should go, what should they do, give it to them. And also, if you want to give them any more teases of what's up your sleeve, what's coming down the pike over there in the land of Genesis volatility, now is the time, sir. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. So, yes, you can visit the Genesis Volatility product suite at gvol.io. We are launching the premium subscription model later today. So, for the full shebang, it's $79 a month. For the freemium, it's just, sign up with an email and you can check out some of the charts for free. We also have our Twitter, which is at GenesisVol. And then we have a newsletter, which is genesisvolatility.substack.com.
There you go. No shortage of places to find them over there, genesisvolatility.io. Give them a follow on the old Twitters as well, at GenesisVol. They tweet out a lot of great stuff there in between episodes of this program. Check out their newsletter if you haven't subscribed to it as well. Great weekly breakdown of a lot of the stuff we talk about here on the show, the SKEW, the OI, all that fun stuff, the volatility, realized versus implied. If you like getting into that on a lot more detail, check out the Genesis Volatility newsletter as well. And on behalf of Greg and indeed myself, I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, subscribing, for tuning in live, for sending in your questions and comments. We love to hear from all you. Remember, if you're new to the show or you're new to the network, this is by no means all of what we do. We do a ton of stuff here on the network. We're pretty much hitting you every day, if not twice a day, with great content. So tune in tomorrow. We got Interview Tuesday with some great interviews going on throughout the world of options and derivatives of volatility. Education Wednesday, we've got Options Bootcamp and indeed the old Options Playbook Radio. So if you're a little bit newer to the options front, maybe some of these terms we're throwing around here like SKEW and OI and all that kind of stuff is a little bit intimidating to you. Education Wednesday has the shows for you. Thursday, we come back at it with the Option Block, episode 2, as well as this week in futures options, getting into all the Commodity Friday volatility views. And we kick it all off again on Monday with another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.